好，各位代表，请大家在自己的座位上坐好，谢谢大家。
I think we just go.
前面我看还有个，就不用那个，他们前面有个视频播放，就不用了吧？我看这个议程上。
刚才没放的是吧？
啊？
刚才休息的时候放吧。
放了没有？刚才？
没有。
No, it's okay. No,
Okay.
we can start because then they will.
Distinguished delegates, please take your seats. Distinguished delegates, the COP15, COP4, COP10 joint plenary is now resumed. During this plenary, we are going to stocktake the progress of the COP so far. First of all, I would like to invite the ministers and the senior representatives attending this plenary to take your seats. Just now, we successfully concluded the high-level segment of this COP. I am glad to inform all the ministers and delegates that all ministers and high-level representatives have dedicated themselves to the negotiations, and we will soon hear the report of their consultations. Besides, during the high-level meeting, I noticed that almost 40 parties and stakeholders have announced a series of important measures and actions to be taken, many of which are related to resource mobilization and flagship projects related to biodiversity conservation and synergy projects together with the climate actions. This will greatly improve our ambition and help and provide political impetus to the conclusion of the global biodiversity framework. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to these delegates and the countries and parties. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's stocktake the progress. Since last Saturday, which is December the 10th, when we had the last stocktaking, I have been monitoring the progress of work of all working groups. I am glad to see that so far we have reached fruitful results. I would like to invite the chairs of the working groups to report back to us the progress. Now, first of all, I would like to invite Madam Rosemary Patterson from New Zealand to report on the work of the Working Group 1.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished delegates, I am happy to provide an update on the progress made by Working Group 1 since the last meeting of this plenary on 10 December, during which the COP had already adopted 5 decisions prepared by Working Group 1, namely on informing the scientific and technical evidence base for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, review of progress in the implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020 and the achievement of the Aichi biodiversity targets, development of a new programme of work and institutional arrangements on Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention related to Indigenous peoples and local communities, the in-depth dialogue on the thematic areas and other cross-cutting issues, and on recommendations from the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues to the Convention on Biological Diversity. Since then, work under Working Group 1 has continued in contact groups and groups of friends of the Chair, which made significant progress on the remaining items. I was able to prepare the following CRPs, which are planned to be considered by the Working Group at its meeting this evening. CRP 2 on COP Agenda Item 9D on Agenda Plan of Action. CRP 7 on COP Agenda Items 9C and 13C Communication. CRP 8 on COP Agenda Item 15B, Cooperation with other conventions and international organizations. CRP 9 on COP Agenda Item 16B, Engagement with subnational governments, cities and other local authorities. CRP 7 on COP Agenda Item 13B, Knowledge Management and the Clearinghouse Mechanism. The groups also progressed considerably in their work on the 6 main items of this conference. The contact group on item 9A on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, led by Basile Van Havre from Canada and Francis Ogwell from Uganda, has met 13 times, roughly for a total of 50 hours. The group worked under the mandate of reviewing the entire framework, focusing on resolving bracketed text without adding new text. As a result of the work over the last several days, the contact group was able to review the entire framework. The outcomes of its work were captured in a non-paper. Significant progress was made in many areas. For instance, many paragraphs in Section B bis, Section B, and Target 14 were completely cleaned. Overall, parties were very close to clearing several other targets, and I thank parties sincerely for their continued support and cooperation. The co-chair's assessment shows that many brackets still remain in the text. However, they are of the view that the work of the group over the last few days has brought us to a stage where many of those brackets can be reviewed and resolved quickly in sets, as long as the parties are willing to show a spirit of compromise. The co-chairs conveyed to me that they are convinced that the remaining issues can be resolved if they are addressed at the political level. The co-chairs remain committed to supporting the negotiations process towards its successful conclusion as necessary. On item 9B on the monitoring framework, a Friends of the Chair group was convened, facilitated by Substa Chair Hezekiel Benitez and Anne Teller of the EU. The group met 3 times since the last plenary. I am pleased to announce that the text on the monitoring framework and the text of the related decision and its annexes are clean. There are a few brackets in the list of headline indicators which relate to the text in the Global Biodiversity Framework and on resource mobilisation. However, these brackets can be resolved when the other decisions are finalised. There was no agreement on the red list of ecosystems indicator, which remains in brackets. On CBD item 11 and item 14 under the Nagoya Protocol on digital sequencing information, a contact group co-chaired by Letitia Chitwamulumoni of South Africa and Gotha Voigt Hansen of Norway was convened. The group established a Friends of the Co-Chairs group, facilitated by Mr. William Lockhart of the UK and Ms. Mfatsu Kalemba of Malawi, which met 6 times since December to undertake text negotiations on the draft decision. The Friends group worked extremely hard, and the final outcome of its deliberations has been made available by the contact group as a non-paper. As you can see, there are still some square brackets in the text, both in the preamble and in the operative text. The main outstanding issue is whether the COP adopts a decision on a process for further work on DSI, or whether the COP adopts a decision that establishes a mechanism for benefit sharing from the use of DSI and also sets out a process for further work. On item 12A, on resource mobilisation, the contact group, co-chaired by Ms. Ines Fillet from Belgium and Mr. Shonasani Munzedzi from South Africa, has met several times and made strides towards finding convergence on the draft decision and the elements contained therein, despite time constraints and the considerable volume of text that had not been considered by the subsidiary body on implementation. After hearing parties' positions on key building blocks of the resource mobilisation package during the first 2 sessions, seeking to identify points of convergence, the co-chairs produced a consolidated text which reflected what had been heard from the parties. This text has since been used as the basis for paragraph-by-paragraph negotiations. By Thursday evening, the contact group was able to finish the first reading of the text, and the second reading was completed by the early morning of Saturday, save for the preambular paragraphs and Annex 1. The group entrusted the co-chairs to undertake a technical clean-up of Annex 1. The outcomes of discussions have been captured in a non-paper. While the contact group was able to solve a number of issues, delegates continued to have divergent views on key issues such as the establishment of new global instruments on biodiversity finance and the precise process leading to them. Regarding COP Agenda Item 13A, capacity building and development, and technical and scientific cooperation, the contact group co-chaired by Mr. Hayo Hanstra of the Netherlands and Ms. Laura Bermudez of Colombia met 5 times between 10 and 15 December to resume consideration of the draft decision related to capacity building and development and technical and scientific cooperation. The group managed to lift most of the square brackets from the decision text. Only 8 sets of brackets remained, 2 in preambular paragraphs and 2 in Annex 1 and 4 in Annex 2, relating to resource mobilisation, planning, monitoring, reporting and review, and digital sequencing information. Annex 3 on the terms of reference of the informal advisory group on technical and scientific cooperation is clean. A non-paper has been prepared to reflect these outcomes. The contact group on item 4, mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reporting and review, co-chaired by Gillian Guthrie of Jamaica and Andrew Stott of the UK, met 5 times. During the 5 sessions, the contact group discussed the draft decision text and 2 annexes. Annex 1 on guidance on NBSAPs and Annex 2 on the draft template for the 7th and 8th national reports. On the draft decision text, the contact group was able to lift most of the brackets. The remaining brackets relate to the timing of the submission of NBSAP's national targets, the adoption of the draft national reporting template, means of implementation and financial mechanism, and the annex on non-state actor commitments, which was not negotiated due to lack of time. The group agreed on most of Annex 1 on NBSAPs, with a few brackets remaining due to different views on ambition and means of implementation. Parties also reached agreement on Annex 2 on national reports. The outcomes of the working group are captured in a non-paper. Good progress was also made on other items allocated to Working Group 1 as follows. Item 12B on the financial mechanism. The contact group on the item, co-chaired by Mr. Greg Phillick and Ms. Laura Bermudez, Mr. Greg Phillick, Canada, and Ms. Laura Bermudez, Colombia, met on the mornings of 15 and 16 December with the mandate to consider and finalise the draft decision. It has progressed well and has agreed large parts of the draft decision, of the 4-year outcome-oriented framework, of programme priorities of the Convention for the 8th replenishment of the GEF Fund, and of the consolidated previous guidance on the financial mechanism, of the terms of reference for the 6th review of effectiveness of the financial mechanism, as well as on the terms of reference for the assessment of funding needed for the implementation of the Convention and its protocols in the 9th replenishment period of the GEF. Annex 2B of additional guidance to the GEF, drawn from other decisions of the COP and COP MOPs, would still need to be compiled. Item 13B, knowledge management and the clearinghouse mechanism, was considered by the contact group established on capacity building after the group had concluded its work on item 13A. The contact group agreed to defer consideration of the knowledge management component contained in the annex to SBI 4 and COP 16. The group discussed all paragraphs of the draft decision and deleted those related to the knowledge management component. A conference room paper was prepared which contains 3 sets of square brackets linked to resource mobilisation, including reference to Article 20 of the Convention and whether to welcome or take note of one of the initiatives. On item 16A, mainstreaming of biodiversity, the contact group, co-chaired by Stanislas Mulba of Gabon and Carlos Albuquerque of the EU, progressed well at its first meeting. Parties showed a clear spirit of compromise and achieved workable linkages between the long-term approach to mainstreaming as the how and the relevant global biodiversity framework targets as the why. However, a number of issues, including on the ways to support and use the long-term approach to mainstreaming and on an ad hoc technical expert group, remain to be resolved. Mr. President, as you have heard, delegates have worked tirelessly since we last met in plenary and have made considerable progress. I wish to express my sincere appreciation to all the co-chairs, the members of the contact groups and friends of the chairs for their hard work and dedication, and the members of the COP Bureau for their guidance, and to the Secretariat for its support. I am confident that Working Group 1 would be in a position to further progress on some of the outstanding issues, which it has not comprehensively addressed yet due to time constraint. This includes the consideration of all the final conference room papers, as well as further work under item 12B on the financial mechanism and item 16B on mainstreaming. I also believe that items 9A on the Global Biodiversity Framework, 9B on the monitoring framework, item 11 on DSI, 12A on resource mobilisation, 13A on capacity building, and 14 on planning, monitoring, reporting and review would benefit from ministerial inputs and the presidency. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Rosemary Patterson, as chair of the first working group. I thank you very much for your hard work. And I see that your work has been very productive, and it has been very efficient as well. I now give the floor to the chair of the second working group, Madam Helena Jeffrey Brown of Antigua Barbuda. Madam Brown, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. President. Working Group 2 convened 10 sessions since it was established and has concluded the mandate given to it. The atmosphere in the working group has been in general positive and has allowed us to address all items. At the last plenary on the 10th of December, we presented 18 L documents for consideration and adoption. I'm happy to report that the working group now has completed an additional 14 L documents. Under the Convention on Biological Diversity, we have completed our work on the following agenda items. COP item 15A, the second work program of IPBES. COP item 20A, Marine and Coastal Biodiversity, EPSAs. COP item 20B, Marine and Coastal Biodiversity, Conservation and Sustainable Use. COP item 21, Invasive Alien Species. COP item 23, Biodiversity and Climate Change. COP item 24, Biodiversity and Agriculture. COP item 25, Biodiversity and Health. And COP item 18, Multi-Year Program of Work of the Conference of the Parties. The consideration of items under the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety has been completed, and notably the post-2020 implementation plan and capacity building action plan for the Biosafety Protocol have been finalized. These plans are anchored in and complementary to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Under the Cartagena Protocol, we completed CP Item 7A, that's the post-2020 implementation plan, CP Item 7B, Capacity Building Action Plan, CP Item 10, Financial Mechanism Resources, CP Item 13, Review of Effectiveness. We have also finalized the items on the Nagoya Protocol that were allocated to Working Group 2. And in addition to the L documents have adopted during the 10th of December session of plenary, we now also have L documents on NP Item 15, Specialized International Access and Benefit Sharing Instruments, NP Item 16, Global Multilateral Benefit Sharing Mechanism. The working group was successful in completing this impressive workload as a result of the cooperation of the parties, the facilitators, and the co-chairs of the various contact groups and friends of the chairs. I would like to express our sincerest thanks to Ms. Ntaka Dizeni Chizada from South Africa and Mr. Renner Schenkel from Germany, who steered discussions on the 2 contact groups on synthetic biology and risk assessment, supported by Tim Strabala of New Zealand, Ms. Mary May Jeremy of Seychelles, and Ms. Renee Sauvé of Canada for their sterling work on marine and coastal biodiversity, Mr. Ezequiel Benitez of Mexico, and Ms. Janina Heim of Germany for their role on advancing the IPBES program of work, Mr. Hendrik Segers of Belgium, and Mr. Eric Okui of Ghana, who worked well on advanced biodiversity in agriculture, Ms. Senka Baradanovic from Bosnia and Herzegovina for ably facilitating the invasive alien species Friends of the Chair Group, Mr. Sigurd Svensson of Iceland and Ms. Vita Elzagul of Costa Rica worked extensively to support deliberations on biodiversity and climate change, Ms. Barbara Engels of Germany and Mr. Andrew Rhodes of Mexico for their impressive work on biodiversity and health, Mr. Rigobert Intep from Cameroon and Ms. Vita Andorko of Hungary, who collaborated well to advance the implementation plan and capacity building action plan for the Cartagena Protocol, and Ms. Mary Chiachi of EU and Ms. Patience Ganduwa of Zimbabwe for their dedicated support on specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments. I'm proud to note that the working group advanced a number of critical programs of work under the SAPS and the 2 protocols, taking important decisions that will underpin the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. There are some remaining square brackets, including on references to nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based approaches to climate change, as well as digital sequence information that can resolve once cross-cutting processes that are underway have been addressed. This is the case with L documents on biodiversity and health and biodiversity and agriculture. Regarding the specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments under the Nagoya Protocol, the working group agreed to propose to the plenary, taking into account the divergence of views among parties that need more time to be resolved, that the item be further reviewed at the 5th meeting of parties to the protocol on the basis of recommendation 3/16 of the subsidiary body on implementation. For the Global Multilateral Benefit Sharing Mechanism, Article 10 of the Nagoya Protocol, the working group agreed to defer the consideration of the agenda item draft decision until discussion on related issues under other linked agenda items had progressed. While it was disappointing that we were not able to advance the discussions on biodiversity and climate change under the convention, I'm heartened by the fact that we managed to take compromise decisions that did not roll us backwards. I would like to thank everyone who participated in the working group and also the hard-working Secretariat, who made a big difference in advancing the work of the Convention and its protocols. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Madam Brown, for your report.
Thank you for leading your working group in carrying out a very efficient work. Thank you very much. In addition to the ongoing work of the working groups, at the start of the high-level segment, I invited pairs of ministers to lead consultations on issues that remained unresolved that would benefit from political guidance. I'd like to give the floor to them now. First of all, I'd like to invite Minister Mujawa Maria from Rwanda and Secretary of State Fleiberth from Germany. They co-facilitate the ministerial consultation on the decision on resource mobilization and related matters. Minister Mesa Rojas from Chile and Minister Espen Barth Eid from Norway has co-facilitated the ministerial consultation on the DSI. Minister Fuad from Egypt and Minister Gilbert from Canada co-facilitated the ministerial consultations on some of the key outstanding issues on the framework. Now, I'd like to invite these ministerial facilitators to provide an update on the progress achieved in these consultations. First of all, for an update on the progress in consultation on DSI, I'd like to give the floor to Excellency Rojas and also His Excellency Espen Eid from Chile and Norway. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear colleagues and friends. Minister Espen Barth Eide from Norway and myself from Chile were asked by the COP President to facilitate consultations with regions and parties on digital sequence information on genetic resources. This topic was identified by the COP Presidency as one of the outstanding issues. We would like to thank him for the trust he gave us with this task. We should remember that this is part of the mandate to COP15. It was to consider DSI in the context of the global biodiversity framework. While the technical negotiation continued, we conducted ministerial-level consultation. We reached out to all regional groups and invited them to share their key priorities as well as proposals on way forward. We had more in-depth conversation with particular interested parties as well. We would like to sincerely thank all parties for their active engagement, constructive and honest inputs. We would also like to thank, and we are very grateful to the co-chairs of the contact group from South Africa and Norway, and to the co-facilitators of the Friends of the Shares from the UK and Malawi, who have worked during the last years, months and weeks on these topics. We regularly briefed with them so that we could have a broader view of the technical negotiations as well. Without their excellent assistance of the Secretariat as well, we would not have been able to finish our task. We have listened carefully, searching for ways of accommodating different views, positions, and priorities. The overwhelming majority of parties were directing us towards a multilateral solution on benefit sharing for the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources. It was also widely recognized that details on such discussion need further work. I would also now like to give the floor to my colleague Espen Eid from Norway.
Thank you to Minister Rojas. Based on the thorough consultations that Minister Rojas just referred to with all interested parties, we handed over this morning to the COP President a proposal from the two of us based on the thrust of all the discussions that we will be having with parties. It is a clean text without any brackets, and it proposes that we decide to establish a multilateral mechanism for the fair and equitable sharing of benefits from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources.
We also, in the text, we also underline that there should be respect for already existing national arrangements, and we propose the establishment of an open-ended working group that will work on the modalities of this, but as I said, the text reads decides to establish. We respect that there will be many parties with different views, and not every party to this had this as their starting point. But I would very strongly say that we so much recognize and welcome the will by so many parties to accommodate something that we could finally agree on. And we believe that at the best of our efforts, at the best of our judgment, this is the closest we get to a document that can be accepted here. There will be some more pain felt by some delegations than others, but this, I think, is the only way to move forward on this, and I believe that everybody has been listened to. This process, after all, has been maturing over 4 full years, so there are not many aspects that have not been discussed, and we believe that COP15 is the place to actually make a decision to the effect that we just described. We have handed this over to the President, so this is now a document of the COP President, who will work on this alongside the other proposals that he will be getting in the course of the day or the coming days. And we, of course, recognize that we will have to look at the totality, and I think most parties in this room want to see how the total package looks at the end of the day. But we believe that we have done what we could to make this as close as possible, and I would strongly recommend everybody to coalesce around a solid decision at this meeting. The modalities will still have to be filled out, but we do believe that this is within the realm of the possible. And Mr. President, Minister Rojas and I will of course remain at your disposal for continued work on making sure that this part of the COP will be led to a successful conclusion. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Minister Rojas and Minister Eid. Thank you for excellent work. Next, we're going to listen to the 2 ministers from Rwanda, His Excellency Mujawa Maria and State Secretary Flashbath. They lead the ministerial consultation on resource mobilization.
Mr. President, Minister Jochen Flashbath and myself, we have been tasked by President to co-facilitate the consultation on the topic of resources mobilization. We thank you, Mr. President, for the trust. We have had a number of consultation meetings with regional groups and those who proposed positions on the issue during the negotiations. Meetings took place in a consultative atmosphere, and we got the impression that all are willing to achieve a good solution, which will help us to implement an ambitious global biodiversity framework. We concentrate on the numbers for resource mobilization and the funding structure/architecture. We listened carefully to the groups and think we got a good understanding of their views. Regarding the overall global financial resources for biodiversity, we got the sense that all groups were more or less in agreement with a number of $200 billion annually by 2030, and that these would include funding from all sources, international, domestic, public, and private. Regarding the international flows to developing countries, we got a good indication that an increase is needed and should be materialized. Regarding the funding structures, we also listened carefully to the groups and got the sense that here there is still a larger spectrum of views which will require flexibility from all groups. My co-facilitator, Jochen, could further elaborate on this. I thank you.
President, dear colleagues and friends, as my dear colleague, Minister Mujaba Maria, pointed out, there is still a wide range of views on the question of the architecture on biodiversity finance. We saw that some parties would favor the establishment of a standalone fund outside the existing funding structure. Others would like to improve the existing funding mechanisms and are not in favor to establish anything new. We also discussed with groups in several meetings a proposal that was originally proposed by Colombia, that there might be a compromise medium ground in establishing a dedicated fund on global biodiversity that is linked and administrated by the Global Environment Facility. Regarding the financial inflows into whatever kind of fund, there is again a range of views, that it should include private finance and philanthropics as a broad support. Divergence appears to the question whether and to which extent ODA finance should also be included. President, dear colleagues and friends, our sense is that it is not feasible to leave Montreal without taking a decision on a fund for biodiversity, and that we need to find out with parties and, of course, your help, President, what can be done to find a middle ground between the two ends of the spectrum. Listening to all groups, we had the feeling that over the last 36 hours, parties flexibilized their positions, but to be honest, not to the extent that is needed. Thanks a lot, President.
Thank you very much, two ministers. Thank you for your very productive work, which gives us some prospect of resolving the issues. Now we are going to hear from two ministerial facilitators, Minister Fouad from Egypt and Minister Gilbert from Canada. So the floor is yours, ministers.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of my co-chair, Minister Gilbert, I would like to thank you for your leadership to ensure we advance to an ambitious post-2020 GPF that we can give to the world and our future generations. We appreciate your trust in us to advance to this goal. Since you appointed us on December 15, we met with each regional group to understand their views and perspectives. And in doing so, we learned that we all want an ambitious GBF and recognize very well that this is linked to resource mobilization. Our main focus was on seeking parties' views on Goal A and Targets 1, 2, and 3. We also discussed Targets 7 and 8, which are also particularly important to parties for the ambition. Based on this discussion, we will be putting recommendations to the presidency that capture the main comments that we have received and where we see potential for convergence. We are also pleased to note that in our consultations, the regional groups focused on recommendations that grounded in the objective to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. We also witnessed and are pleased to see a level of cooperation and engagement by parties and regional groups over the past 2 days. We would like to thank the co-chairs of the Global Biodiversity Framework, Basil and Francis, for their hard work, which they still up till now continuing to do. We would like to express our thanks and appreciation to you, Mr. President, for the task given to Canada and Egypt to help advance the discussion on the importance of the GPF. Thank you.
I agree with obviously everything that my colleague from Egypt, Minister Fouad, said. I would just like to add our thanks to the co-facilitators of the working group who've worked very hard for many years on the GBF text, Basil Van Havre, as well as Francis Ogwal. Thank you very much.
Thank you to ministers. Thank you for your hard and productive work. Thank you to all the ministerial co-facilitators for your efforts, your contribution, and your outcomes. I thank you for your support to the whole consultation process. I will give an update on my plans for next steps on facilitating the process later. The budget contact group has had a meeting to discuss the budget for a program work for the 2023 to 2024 period. I'd like to invite the chair of the budget contact group, Mr. Zidane of Egypt, to provide us with a progress report on their work. The floor is yours, Mr. Zidane.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am pleased to report on progress made in the budget group. Since our last meeting and the report to the plenary, the budget group has held 11 meetings and continued to make progress. The contact group continued to diligently discuss the draft decision and considered a number of text additions proposed by a number of parties. Few paragraphs of the decision text remain in brackets and will continue to be addressed by the contact group this afternoon. The process included a number of requests for clarification and information to the Secretariat, which were provided. The budget group also considered meetings, costs, components of intersessional meetings, framework, and eventual extraordinary meetings expectations emanating from the two working groups. In the morning of Thursday, the group received the Deputy Executive Secretary to provide information and address questions from the group on intersessional process. The Secretariat presented to the contact group a review of the audits by the OIOS and the Board of Auditors of the United Nations, the resulting recommendations and responses by the Secretariat. The contact group was also briefed and discussed the Secretariat's risk analysis. The budget group initiated a review and discussions of the staffing of the Secretariat and its need to maintain capacity to respond to the requests by the parties and implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In the process, the group requested the Secretariat to provide further information on the staffing requirements, associated functions, and costings, which were provided by the Secretariat. In one of the sessions, and as requested, the contact group received a visit by the Executive Secretary of the Convention to address the status of the Secretariat staffing, provide additional information on the rationale for the requests submitted to the Conference of the Parties, and address questions. The contact group will reconvene this afternoon and continue to work on all pending issues in a spirit of compromise and collaboration. Finally, Mr. President, I would like to thank all the parties engaged in the budget contact group meetings for their professionalism and positive atmosphere, and the Secretariat for its remarkable support. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zadan. I would also like to congratulate the chairs of the working groups and the representatives participating in the working groups, and also the members of the contact groups. I would like to wish that the working groups and various contact groups can continue your good work and finish all the tasks. Now let us enter the discussion phase. I would like to invite the representatives from regional groups to deliver statements. I urge regional groups to limit their statements to 5 minutes. Please, if you are speaking on behalf of the regional groups, please take your seats. I would like to first of all give the floor to the representative from the African regional group. Sir, you have the floor.
Yeah.
Floor to European Union, please.
Floor to European Union, please.
Thank you very much, President, distinguished colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor to address this plenary on behalf of the European Union and its 27 member states. Let me start by thanking the Chinese presidency for the excellent organization of the work over the last days. I would also like to thank the facilitators, chairs, negotiators and technical teams for their tireless work on the text of the Global Biodiversity Framework and all other COP decisions. Decision time is approaching. And as the clock counts down, we need to remember why we are here. We are here to ensure that societies, economies and communities continue to thrive, not just for decades, but for centuries to come. That will not happen without transformative action. It will not happen unless we make nature a global priority across our economies and throughout our societies. It will not happen if we fall below the level of ambition of the Aichi targets. It will not happen unless we learn from our past mistakes. An effective monitoring and review framework with headline indicators is an indispensable element in any successful deal. It will not happen without measurable numerical targets to effectively monitor progress. And it will not happen without targets to ensure that biodiversity is used in a sustainable manner. All areas under agriculture, forestry and fisheries must be managed for the longer term, and long-term sustainability means a 50% reduction in our inputs of pesticides and nutrients. To avoid our ship from sinking, you need to fix every hole. Nature is our ship. We are steering between icebergs and rocks, and there are holes in the bottom of our boat. With restoration, we start to fix those holes. We need a clear goal, like 6 billion hectares of terrestrial and marine ecosystems. This is good for biodiversity, for climate change, and for local economies. It keeps the boat afloat. We also need a truly ambitious 30 by 30 target. As a global community, we should commit to solid biodiversity outcomes by the middle of the century. And that means at least 25% reduction of our ecological footprint by 2030, to bring it within planetary boundaries by 2050. We cannot outsmart nature, but we can work with it as we travel in the same direction, with nature-based solutions, enhancing connectivity, ensuring sustainable management and mainstreaming biodiversity across policies and sectors. We do much more than protection. We help fight climate change. We reduce our pollution, and we get nature back on track. These solutions are the safest course for our ships. During our bilateral consultations, we have heard a clear request from developing countries to implement an ambitious biodiversity framework. They need resources. We need to see finance from all sources on a scale that fits the enormous challenge we face. Progress on ambition will facilitate progress on finance. We understand the call from developing countries for new and additional resources and capacity building, as there is a real gap in financing nature. We must recreate the spirit of solidarity and cooperation that is the foundation of the Convention. Several parties, including the EU and several member states, have pledged significant increases of their international support over the next years. And I repeat that we are ready to scale up our support to partner countries. And I call on other countries with capacity to join us in this endeavor.
President, Excellencies, the transition to nature-positive societies will require more resources than we currently see on the table. We need to align financial flows with our biodiversity objectives, mobilize domestic finance, establish national biodiversity finance plans, and agree on an ambitious numerical value on repurposing harmful incentives. We also call on international financial institutions and multilateral development banks to significantly boost their nature-positive finance. An agreement on benefit sharing from the use of digital sequence information would contribute to mobilize additional resources for biodiversity. We are very close to an agreement on DSI, and I hope that the issue can be successfully resolved. For the EU and its member states, the solution must be multilateral. Burdensome procedures should be avoided, open access should be preserved, and scientific research must be able to continue at speed. President, dear colleagues, we are all in the same boat. I look to Presidency to propose a course that is ambitious, effective, and balanced. We will play our part searching for solutions. But we must make sure that the deal is ambitious. It must address the direct drivers of biodiversity loss to protect our nature, ensure sustainable livelihoods, and thereby help eradicate poverty. I believe that we are here all together to find the effective and realistic way to halt and reverse alarming biodiversity loss at all levels, ecosystems, species, and genetic, with clear, smart targets and implementation framework. Negotiations are entering the final stretch. All around the world, citizens are watching. They are placing their hopes in us. Let's find the solutions we need. Let's prove ourselves worthy of that trust. It's a challenge of planetary dimensions. May our leadership rise to the occasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your statement. Now I would like to invite the representative from Antigua and Barbuda to deliver a statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am speaking on behalf of 38 small island developing states in the Caribbean, Pacific, Indian Ocean, and African regions. Mr. President, we are pleased to see that the spirit of compromise and understanding has finally visited these proceedings, and we are still optimistic that at the end of these meetings, we will have an ambitious global biodiversity framework that SIDS are able to implement with adequate means of financing and capacity. While we are hopeful, we have been disturbed by the pointed effort to misrepresent the text of the Convention, either to exclude SIDS or to exclude any mention of our special circumstances. As a reminder, Mr. President, Article 20, which is the guiding article we have been using in our discussions on resource mobilization, capacity building, finance, and budget, mentions that these special circumstances that small island developing states and least developed countries in particular should be taken into consideration. Mr. President, SIDS took the floor at the opening plenary exactly 10 days ago to outline our particular vulnerabilities and the devastating impacts the loss of biodiversity has been having on our livelihoods, economies, well-being, and cultural identities by reasons that go well beyond climate change impacts. Despite us highlighting the threats to our resilience and rebuilding efforts and requesting that parties who are not SIDS fully appreciate our special circumstances within the context of the Convention and its protocols, we have had to put up tremendous effort in many contact groups, working groups, and friends of the co-chair to remind parties that we must remain faithful to the text of Article 20. We cannot pick and choose which articles suit our needs. Cherry-picking text to support one agenda and attempting to cast aside the remainder is not within the spirit of the Convention or our discussions. We again take this time to highlight the multiple decisions on cooperation with other conventions, organizations, and processes, including the thematic work programs on island biodiversity from 2010 and the mainstreaming of the Samoa Pathway, including Decision 213, Paragraph 4, Decision 321, Paragraph 3, Decision 415, Paragraphs 4 and 5, Decision 824, and Decision 921. We have noted over the years with great concern that our program of work to respond to the vulnerabilities of SIDS biodiversity under the Convention and its protocols has either been sidelined or not prioritized. This is unacceptable, and we ask that this matter be addressed as a matter of utmost urgency. Mr. President, in these final days, we are demanding that any mention of Article 20 be represented in its entirety. We again invoke the spirit of compromise and remind parties that there is no shared future for life on Earth without small island developing states. And we will continue to maintain this position at meetings and future meetings of the Convention and its protocols, and we look forward to the support of other parties and other stakeholders in this regard. Thank you, Mr. President.
主席说非常感 Chair said, thank you very much. Now we would like to invite a representative from Chile to deliver a statement.
President, Chile is speaking on behalf of Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Peru, and Mexico. President, we find ourselves in the middle of a planetary crisis where 50% of the population is found itself living in highly vulnerable areas, and 25% do not have access to drinking water, and the rate of extinction is very high each day for anthropogenic factors, and 40% of the Earth is in a process of degradation. Recognizing this crisis, 4 years ago, we decided to embark on some of the most complex negotiations that we've seen recently, and it has not been easy to work through the individual interests in order to build a shared vision to take care of our common home. Our countries, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Mexico, and Peru, are guardians of a great part of the world's biodiversity, and we've taken great efforts to contribute to building an ambitious and effective agreement. We are founders and members of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, and also the Nature's Pact for Leaders, and also we precursors of the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans Accelerator, amongst some of the other projects in which we're involved. For us, the Global Biodiversity Framework is not just a text, it's a pact to reverse and stop the loss of biodiversity in the next decades for current and future generations. Given this, the 30 by 30 target is not just a number, it is a guiding light for protection and conservation and ecosystem restoration actions in the next decade to come, where Indigenous communities and local peoples will play a determining role. We cannot leave Montreal without having robust commitments to conservation, sustainable use, and a fair and equitable distribution of the benefits derived from genetic resources. Nor can we leave this city without reaching an agreement on funding, capacity building, and technology transfer that needs to be clear so that we can start right away with the implementation of our long-term long-term goals and targets to ensure sustainability. Finally, we need to have a robust, progressive monitoring framework which will allow us to make progress and identify the challenges that need to be addressed in order to continue to make progress. We cannot fall into this perverse game of actually reversing ambitions, because we cannot play with our planet. It's the responsibility of everyone to ensure that we show ambition on all fronts. President, we'd like to ask you and all parties to seize this unique opportunity and resolve the differences that continue. We need to take this perspective of pursuing the common good. The differences that are continuing between parties will be forgotten once this COP ends. However, we will not forget the legacy that we are collectively achieving for the planet. Our group in these final hours will be supporting all the parties and your presidency to identify the solutions that we need in order to go back home with the conviction that we have taken the necessary measures that are required to deal with this unprecedented crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your statement. Now I would like to give the floor to representative from the Micronesian.
Mr. President, I align Micronesia's statement with the one delivered a short while by Antigua and Barbuda on behalf of the small island developing states. The convention explicitly mentions the special conditions of small island developing states in light of the abundance of biodiversity in our lands and waters, as well as our deep dependence on their conservation and sustainable use. The convention particularly addresses the special conditions in each Article 20, recognizing that the mobilization and provision of financial resources to support the implementation of the convention must pay particular attention to the special conditions of small island developing states. Over multiple COPs leading into this one, the parties to the convention were faithful to the convention text. We adopted numerous decisions that recognize the particular needs and special conditions of small island developing states as a subset of developing country parties, including decisions pertaining to financial resources, capacity building, and other means of implementation. My delegation expected the same degree of fidelity to the convention coming into this COP, including in connection with the negotiations for an adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We are therefore disappointed at the significant resistance we encountered at this COP from the other developing countries that attempted to systematically erase multiple mentions of small island developing states from various COP decisions, as well as from the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This is not a zero-sum game. Recognizing the special conditions and particular needs of small island developing states does not deprive all other developing countries of the validity of your needs and the urgency by which they must be addressed. We support you. We expect the same degree of support back. In recent days, small island developing states have managed to strike some delicate compromises with interested parties on this matter, but only after significant and unnecessary strife. My delegation hopes that we will do better going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. Now I would like to give the floor to representative from Australia.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor and for your efforts in leading us towards the conclusion of a successful COP15. And thank you to our Canadian hosts, in particular the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today. This is a critical moment. The world has agreed to net zero. Now we must agree to be nature positive. A net zero, nature positive world. To do that, we need a global biodiversity framework that is both ambitious and achievable. We are encouraged by the progress that has been reported on this morning. That's important because nature is running out of time. Nature needs urgent protection and repair. That's why the framework, we agree, must have ambitious targets. Protecting 30% of our land and oceans by 2030. Zero new extinctions, strong partnerships with First Nations peoples. And we must all hold ourselves to account. We must be able to measure how we're going, to celebrate our success, but also to know where we must do better. Australia supports clear performance indicators for each goal and target, and strong monitoring, reporting and review. Implementation and transparency will be key. Nature protection and repair is a massive job, and of course government funding has a critical role to play. That's why Australia plans to increase our international public finance for nature through to 2030 to support developing countries implement an ambitious GBF. This builds on our commitment to double development assistance funding to $2 billion over 2020-25 for climate, including environment and biodiversity projects, in particular working with our friends in the Pacific. But of course governments can't do this alone. We must make credible commitments to increase resources from all possible sources to implement the framework. In Australia, we are setting up a world-leading nature repair market to encourage and guide private investment in nature. Over coming decades, analysis shows this market could unlock $137 billion for nature protection and repair in Australia alone. We want this for the world too. On digital sequence information, Australia supports a benefit sharing mechanism, an agreed way to share benefits fairly and equitably without compromising science and research. Friends, to get an agreement over the line, we need to move rapidly towards consensus. We have had 4 years to make our views known. Now is the time to focus on what really matters, to cooperate, to compromise, and as Aussies would say, to use a bit of common sense. Friends, an ambitious agreement is within our grasp. Let's get it done.
Thank you, Australia. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland. You have the floor.
Mr. President, let me first thank you again for your leadership. As you have outlined, we have been able to progress on several elements of the broader package. However, the most important elements remain still open. This is the moment to change the way and the format in which we interact. Mr. President, dear colleagues, as we are now entering a new phase, Switzerland would like to remind 3 key principles which should guide our further work. First, commitment towards a solution. The outcome of this COP has to be solution-oriented. It has to focus on our common objective to preserve and sustainably use our natural resource base. This common interest requires ambition. Ambition has to be the guiding star for our work towards a solution. Switzerland therefore expects that the text which we will adopt at the end of the COP will be ambitious. Second, effectiveness. Ambition alone is not sufficient. Ambition that is not effective will not bring us towards our objective. Effectiveness requires that solutions address the real problems which we face. Let me illustrate this with an example. We all agree that implementation of the framework will require additional resources. Amount of resources, availability, and access are the real challenges. We have to find solutions that address these challenges. Effectiveness also requires feasibility. Support has to increase from all sources, from public, private, domestic, and international sources. We know an increase of resources is feasible, but some of the numbers that have been mentioned are simply not realistic. Focusing on unrealistic and unfeasible demands will not bring us forward. Finally, fairness. An ambitious, effective, and feasible solution has also to be fair. And fairness requires foremost that all who have the capacity will have to support those who need support. Any other solution is not fair, and it is also not effective nor ambitious. Mr. President, thank you again for your leadership. My delegation is committed to a robust outcome that is ambitious, effective, and fair. And we are ready to work with you and all our partners towards such an outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Switzerland, for your statement. I give the floor to the representative of Senegal. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Sir, Africa wishes to praise the progress which has been achieved, and we remain wedded to the adoption of a bold global framework, one which would be transformational in nature for biodiversity, accompanied with a plan which would be just as bold in terms of mobilizing resources. In this respect, we'd like to reiterate Africa's call for the creation of a new fund for biodiversity. We also welcome the progress which has been achieved in terms of the DSI. Sir, we'd also like to pay tribute to the repeated commitments in favor of mobilization and technology transfer. Africa also welcomes the approach which was set out by the presidency in terms of our negotiation process. Sir, I will be brief because the time has come to act, and we would like to see the time remaining to us to be used to rapidly adopt a bold framework which is commensurate with our hopes and expectations. I thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. I now give the floor to Canada, the representative of Canada. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. It has been a pleasure for Canada to host COP15. I hope you have felt at home in my home city of Montreal. As Minister of Environment and Climate Change, I am also responsible for Canada's weather service. So I guess I take some responsibility for having ordered all this snow. I have heard that many of you were able to embrace your newfound Canadianness and partake in a capacity building session on snowman building. And I'm happy to congratulate the winners of the first ever CBD Cup snowman building competition. Malaysia for biggest snowman, South Africa for funniest snowman, and the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, the most original snowman. Along with you, Mr. President, I have been here since the beginning of this meeting, and I have witnessed firsthand all of the hard work and dedication from all countries. And it is very clear to me that we are all here to achieve an ambitious outcome for nature that is greater than ourselves. And it is why the decisions we take over these final days are so important. I know many of us are tired, but I also know that we are very passionate. We are in the final hours of a marathon that has started more than 3 years ago. And as a marathon runner, I know that the most difficult part can always be the final stretch. But we must roll up our sleeve just a bit further. This is it, the moment when we need to make a decision. Collaboration, compromise, and consensus, or disagree, delay, and risk that which we valued above all. Because that's what this biodiversity conference, COP15, is about. Protecting nature to protect humanity. Quelle cause a autant le pouvoir d'unifier?
We have the power, nothing has the power to unify such as the survival of life on the planet. The world is seeing a massive extermination of species. Everything is accelerating, and the time has come to accord the respect it deserves to our planet, as well as the stakes which undermine the natural balance which supports life on Earth. We require a post-2020 framework for biodiversity, which is bold and which is inclusive and includes the protection of 30% of our lands and oceans. One which is developed and implemented in partnership with indigenous peoples, which includes transparency and reporting mechanisms. One which underscores and focuses on the reasons for the loss of biodiversity and is backed by a commitment to commit resources in keeping with the scale of the crisis by all involved stakeholders. We therefore turn to all those who wish to see a bold agreement to recognize that results are linked to the mobilization of resources.
Mobilized, understand that we can only get there with ambition. We can come together on the key remaining issues before us. We did this in Paris. We can do it here in Montreal. The entire world is watching. We have the power to change the course of history for the better, and the world knows it. Let's give nature the Paris moment it deserves. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Canada, for your statement. I now give the floor to New Zealand. You have the floor.
Mr. President, I want to acknowledge the efforts of the Chinese presidency in bringing ministers together here, and of course Canada for hosting and organising snow. I also want to sincerely thank the ministers who have guided the various consultations, which I have found extremely valuable. I have trust that those discussions will be reflected in the next steps. It is clear that we are being asked to make further compromises. At the end of the day, we can't continue to ask nature herself to compromise. The halt and reverse of biodiversity decline needs ambition in all areas. The global biodiversity framework itself, the means to enable all of us to achieve its goals and targets, and a way forward on digital sequencing information. Turning the tide on biodiversity loss demands that we protect 30% of land and ocean by 2030. For our region, the Blue Pacific, the health of our marine environment is vital. We must respect the rights of Indigenous peoples and recognise their significant contribution to the sustainable management of conservation of biodiversity. We acknowledge the special circumstances of small island developing states. We stand ready to do what is necessary to achieve an ambitious global biodiversity framework, measurable and measured actions, and effective targeted means of support to where it is most needed, for a future that is nature positive. Thank you, Mr. President. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, a tēnā rā tātou katoa.
I thank you, New Zealand, for your statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom. You have the floor.
Delegates, Your Excellencies, Executive Secretary, Mr. President. After 4 hard years of negotiation, we've nearly reached agreement on a truly transformational solution for the problem of sharing benefits on the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources, on a package of headline indicators which would enable us to properly, collectively monitor the health of our planet, and on a robust package of measures to drive the real-world implementation of our commitments. And although the text of our global biodiversity framework remains full of square brackets, I call on you, please, do not attempt to overcome our differences by imagining that we want to compromise on a middle ground. Rally us around a text which drives us forwards and upwards. Upwards on every single target, from restoration through to 30 by 30 to finance. Build our shared commitment to a challenge to the world to do things differently and to do it better. Mr. President, yours is a heavy responsibility. The eyes of the world watch expectantly, but it is not yours to bear alone. In the coming days and hours, we stand ready to support you, however much support you need. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the representative of Brazil. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. President. I will try to be brief. To begin with, I'd like to commend you once again for the great work you've been doing as President of this COP. We'd also like to thank heartily the co-facilitators and the co-chairs of all the working groups, also those who have been co-chairing the Friends of the Chair groups. Thank you very much. All of you have been doing a great job here in steering us through these complex and very important negotiations. We'd also like to thank all of the delegates present here, all of them from every country, for their tireless efforts. It is clear, Mr. President, that now we really are making steady progress towards a deal. The tone in negotiations in all meeting rooms has been markedly constructive over the last couple of days, and we're really satisfied. It is a great thing, I think, a notable development that we are now, I think, close to an agreement on the crucial issue of DSI. We've also made progress, I believe, in discussions on the GBF and also resource mobilization to a degree. In respect of those two core components of the package that we should agree on within the next 2 days, even though it is true that there are still many brackets in the negotiating text that we have, we are convinced that the number of, the issues, the key issues that are actually holding us back from a deal, from an agreement, are relatively few in number. And we are confident that if all delegations within the next couple of days are willing to display flexibility, we should be able to agree. We really do look forward, the Brazilian delegation, to a set of ambitious outcomes in respect of all of these core issues, both the GBF, DSI, and resource mobilization. And above all, we look forward to an outcome that is fully aligned with Agenda 2030 and the concept of sustainable development and its 3 pillars. We have the environmental, the social, and the economic. And so we think we need to work towards a package that is both biodiversity, nature, and people positive. We will continue to engage with all parties in a constructive spirit, fully supporting you, Mr. President, as you bring this COP to a close. We really look forward to leaving Montreal with a set of robust and concrete deliverables that will enable all CBD parties to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity in a very significant manner by 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brazil. Now I give the floor to the representative of Costa Rica. Please.
Excelente, señor presidente.
President, Excellencies, we would like to thank the People's Republic of China for presiding over this important meeting. Costa Rica believes that we cannot have a global biodiversity framework that's ambitious unless we have a clear 30 by 30 target for the lands and the oceans of the world by 2030. For my country, as a co-president of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, HAC, this is a crucial target. It's a central one for the post-2020 GBF. Having said that, in order for this to be an ambitious target, there needs to be three crucial elements included. First of all, there needs to be inclusion of at least 30% of the land and at least 30% of the oceans that should be protected and conserved by 2030. Secondly, that the global targets should have qualitative elements to make sure that the conservation efforts are focused in the right areas and produce adequate results. And thirdly, that the target should include the contributions of indigenous peoples and local communities and guarantee the protection of their rights. We believe that the GBF should include various qualitative elements about the importance of protection, connectivity, conservation and regeneration of ecosystems. We're also aware of the fact that resources should not limit environmental ambition. Nevertheless, it's important to make sure that we need to have a resource mobilization strategy that allows us to translate ambitious into implementation so that we can actually achieve these targets. That's why we think we need to strengthen the role of the GEF. For Costa Rica, these are substantial and necessary elements, and we hope that they will be reflected in the results of this COP. So we're urging countries to increase their ambitions so that we can have a successful approval of the GBF in line with the speech that was made by Chile. We are also convinced that there is not one single response to all of these complex challenges related to predictability and accessibility to resources. There needs to be a solid overall package that deals with all the concerns of the parties. This needs to include new and additional resources from all sources, including ODA, as a renewed commitment expressed by developed countries. Finally, President, we have confidence that the proposal to set up a trust fund in terms of a global biodiversity fund that's dedicated exclusively to the implementation of the new GBF could be a good short-term solution, because we cannot wait to move to implementation. We are convinced that we have to halt the acceleration of biodiversity loss, and we have to take early steps to turn this around, as we've done in our country. And we have to turn around and stop deforestation, and we have to be able to protect 30% at least of our vast oceans. And our country is ready to constructively and proactively support the presidency and of the party so that we can come up with solutions to have an ambitious framework that allows us to take the necessary actions to reverse the loss of biodiversity. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you, Costa Rica. Now the floor is given to Norway. Norway, please.
Thank you, This past year, I have been fortunate enough to be a part of the Norwegian delegation as a youth delegate. It has been frustrating at times, but also immensely motivating to see the importance of biodiversity being placed so high on the political agenda. Because as a young person, this is my future that we are discussing. This framework that we are negotiating will set the tone for our relationship with nature for the rest of my life and for the generations that are coming after us. There has been progress, but there's lots of work to do still. And we need to remember why we are here. In the spirit of compromise seems to have become the slogan of this COP, and it is welcomed. The stakes are high, and the commitments have to match. On ambitions, on rights, on resources, and on the work in DSI. But we cannot compromise out the ambition in the framework. Remember, dear ministers, delegates, and stakeholders, that the world is watching. The global youth is watching, and we are holding you accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway. Now I give the floor to the representative of Argentina.
Thank you very much, President. We have arrived at the final stages of this COP. There is not much more time to deal with things. We have to answer this big question of the COP. Are there going to be new and additional financial resources to implement an ambitious and transformative global framework in developing countries where it's necessary to conserve most of the biodiversity that still exists on the planet? For the moment, we're not sure that's going to be the case, but we do hope that that will be the case. Argentina has committed itself to protecting 30% of its territory by the year 2030. And this is almost double what was agreed in Aichi for land areas and triple of what was agreed for marine areas. Will we be capable of doubling and tripling the resources that are available to implement this ambition? My country will not take a step backwards. We will continue to increase our ambition to conserve and sustainably use biodiversity independently of the results of this COP. But we will only be able to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity in the global south if the framework is truly ambitious with the package of resources that it will provide to developing countries. An ambitious package of resources should include a quantitative target for ODA, Official Development Assistance, and there needs to be a new global biodiversity fund. There needs to be access quickly to resources to facilitate an early implementation of the global framework, as well as a solution to share benefits derived from DSI, which includes a multilateral approach and recognizes existing national arrangements and also promotes scientific research and development. Now, we just have 2 days left to show that we are fully ambitious, and we will continue to work with all countries and with you, President, in order to achieve this. Tomorrow, we're going to have the World Cup in Qatar, and unfortunately, it will only be Argentina or France that will win. But here we have the opportunity to truly rise to a full ambition, and everyone will then be a winner of the true World Cup, the Biodiversity World Cup. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your statement. Now the floor is given to Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Indonesia would like to thank the government of China for its leadership and the government of Canada for hosting this COP15. I would like also to send a special thanks to all negotiators who devoted days and nights to finalizing the draft global biodiversity framework. I wish you all good health and well-being. Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, Indonesia is encouraged by the progress made in the negotiation of the draft of the framework, target, and goal. However, we are under no illusion that there are still many key remaining issues unresolved, and we only have a few days left. as we move forward with this COP15. I would like to appreciate your guidance on how we should proceed. We remain open to negotiating an open square brackets on many issues that are deemed critical to finalize the framework. I would like also to echo to what my Brazilian colleague has just mentioned in its entirety. However, considering the time constraint that we have, I consider it's necessary to reflect Indonesia's position on key issues that we consider red line. First, we must include the principle of CBDR and equity as the main principles for the implementation of the GBF. As we see it, CBDR principles have become the just cogons of international environmental law, and this reflected in Article 20 of the CBD, Principle 7 of the Rio Declaration, and Article 20 of the Paris Agreement. We cannot agree to any GBF that ignore this principle. Second, Indonesia aligned itself with the position of like-minded countries, calling on the COP15 to establish a global biodiversity fund and operationalize it by COP16. We also request commitment from the developed countries to provide new and additional resources in accordance with the Article 20 of the CBD. I believe this is our final position, which is consistent with the position of 69 other like-minded countries. It is shame that COP15 has completely ignored this position. My delegation would like to emphasize that ambitious target of GBF will rely on very much to the action of mega biodiversity countries. Without solidarity of developed countries to provide new and additional support, financial support, our ambition in GBF is just unrealistic ambition. Taking Indonesia as an example, according to our data so far, our domestic funding resources have provided about 25.3% of total funding requirement annually. On the other side, GF only provided about 0.7% annually from GF4 up to GF7. The allocated fund from GF is still far from the needs. We urge developed countries to increase their contribution through GF significantly, while we also look for another alternative to develop dedicated global biodiversity fund as the main financing instrument of GBF post-2020 for long-term and complement the GF. By combining all these financial efforts, we really hope that we can work together to implement the GBF post-2020. Third, regarding Target 18, we oppose any inclusion of numerical values related to harmful subsidies. We consider there are still many outstanding issues regarding harmful subsidies, including definition and scope that are still unclear, and we still need to discuss the impact of this target in widening the gap of local and global inequalities, trade distortion, and the risk of countries using this target as a trade barrier measures. We consider the discussion of these socio-economic issues must be integral when we want to undertake phasing out of harmful subsidies. I also disagree with the inclusion of quantitative target in Target 19 of redirecting $500 billion of harmful subsidy per year as part of shifting the responsibility of developed countries to provide new and additional resources in accordance to Article 20. Finally, concerning Goal A, we support ambitious yet pragmatic target to help reverse the loss of biodiversity post-2020. However, we must realize that not all parties are at the same level if targets are assessed numerically. We are committed to supporting voluntary commitment with the necessary flexibility based on common but differentiated responsibility, recognizing respective national circumstances and priorities and capability. For this reason, we cannot agree with the inclusion of numerical target in Goal A and its related target. Thank you very much. 谢谢, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Indonesia. Now I'd like to give the floor to India.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I acknowledge the contribution of parties for their valuable contribution and hope that this conference reaches a consensus on putting in place the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Reversing ecosystem degradation and halting global biodiversity loss are essential for socio-economic development, human well-being, and for advancing global sustainability. The goals and targets set in Global Biodiversity Framework should be ambitious, yet realistic and practical. Conservation of biodiversity must also be based on common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities as the climate change processes affect biodiversity. Excellencies, for the developing nations, agriculture is a paramount economic driver for rural communities, and the critical support provided to these sectors cannot be redirected. When food security is important for developing countries, prescribing numerical targets in pesticide reduction is unnecessary and must be left to countries to decide based on national circumstances, priorities, and capabilities. Biodiversity conservation requires ecosystem to be conserved and restored historically, holistically, and in an integrated manner. It is in the context that ecosystem approaches for conservation of biodiversity need to be adopted rather than nature-based solution. Excellencies, the successful implementation of the framework will squarely depend on the ways and means we put in place for equally ambitious resource mobilization mechanism. Hence, there is a need to create a new and dedicated mechanism for the provision of financial resources to developing countries' parties. India is fully committed to working closely with all parties so that we are all able to bring out an ambitious and realistic global biodiversity framework in COP15. Thank you very much.
Thank you, India. Now the floor is given to Iran.
Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates. The Islamic Republic of Iran would like to thank the presidents of the Conference of Parties, the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Government of Canada as the host of the conference to organize this conference, and also thank the hard work and efforts made by the parties, chairs of the working groups, contact groups, informal groups to prepare the GBF and the other relevant documents. The Islamic Republic of Iran, as a mega-diverse country, has participated in this conference with the good faith to negotiate and compromise the GBF. And we are committed to the ambitious goals and targets of GBF to move forward the sustainable governance of biodiversity and integrate it into both its sustainable development strategies and national legislations and programs. The Islamic Republic of Iran emphasizes that the implementation of GBF, DSI, and other attached documents requires powerful resource mobilization and a strong support from international resources in a fair, equitable, and easily accessible manner to all developing parties and resources from domestic resources. Article 20 of Convention on Biological Diversity has established a mechanism to provide financial resources to developing parties for the purpose of this convention on a grant to or concessional basis. And the Global Environment Facility has been designated the institutional structure to operate this financial mechanism. Despite significant efforts of Islamic Republic of Iran on environmental and biodiversity conservation based on domestic funds, this party has not been able to receive any fund from GEF over a decade for sustainable development or environmental projects, including biodiversity conservation projects. Mr. President, developing countries requires international financial resources through diverse mechanisms, including Biodiversity Financial Fund, to achieve effectively the ambitious goals and targets of GBF, and no eligible party must be excluded from accessing these resources. Islamic Republic of Iran requests this conference to ask GEF to provide resources to all the eligible parties, irrespective to any political and economic restrictions, and including sanctions imposed on some nations, which exclude their access to international funds and knowledge and exchange and capacity building to achieve their goals of the framework. This party appeals GEF to lift the restricting fund policy on eligible countries and not to exclude any eligible party, including decisions to be considered in the 8th replenishment period of the GEF Trust Fund, to allow all parties to have a contribution to the global movement of GBF. We cannot leave Montreal and implement GBF without the assurance of accessibility to the required finance from the international financial resources. The effective implementation of the DSI also requires both multilateral and bilateral cooperation of the parties. The GBS should also be based on common but differentiated responsibility to recognize the national diverse capacities. The Islamic Republic of Iran requires these issues are considered in the resource mobilization, financial mechanism, DSI, GBF, and other documents. Thank you so much, Mr. President.
I thank you, Iran. Now I give the floor to Colombia.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, we align with the intervention made by Chile in the name of Colombia, Costa Rica, Mexico, and Peru. So we will just highlight some additional key points that we consider important. First, we agreed that it's time to decide on the ambitious framework, and that it's time that we take decisions on the 30% surface area for biodiversity protection, and where it could be accepted to have use of those resources, allow it, because each protected area has its own regime of governance. And based on that, we also want to see, and this is a claim by indigenous peoples in Colombia, that the collective lands of indigenous people is recognized, not because only it is a political and environmental justice aspect, but because it is demonstrated that their lands are better protected with their governance than what we have done in the other parts of the world. And nature, different than we in this room, nature does not have boundaries. The pollination process is a process that needs the world to be able to produce food. Thinking that we can replace that with technology is nonsense, and in that perspective, Colombia supports that 50% of pesticides, especially those that are highly toxic and harmful, are eliminated by 2030. And it's very, very important that we recognize that although we have political differences, that we have geographical differences, that we need to take into account that we are part of a global planet that works as an organism and that creates the flows of life throughout all our political boundaries. If we are not able to recognize that we need to sustain life in this planet, and that this cannot be done in a fragmented way, and we are not able to put together goals that are aligned with the way the ecosystems and the planet works, I'm not sure how we gonna get the results we need. That is not in terms of political power, but is in terms of sustaining the lives of us and all this miraculous planet that we live in. Finally, we think, and it's very important for Colombia, that there is a fair distribution of benefits regarding digital sequencing on genetic resources. Genetic resources are not resources, it's the essence of life, it's what we're made of. And it's not fair that we take this to the market that ends up in patents, and then we, the people, the mega diverse countries that have sustained this capacity of the diversity of life end up without access to what constitutes us as peoples. This is something we really need to take into account and consider deeply. Otherwise, we will end up taking the same system that is destroying life, thinking that the solution is taking life itself to the market. I invite all of us that these forums take political decisions and that we put life first than the economic system, which is destroying it right now.
Thank you very much. Now, I give the floor to the representative of Bolivia. You have the floor.
Gracias. Thank you, President. There exists only one effective solution and to deal with the biodiversity crisis worldwide, and that is the path of respect for all forms of life on Mother Earth, for which we have to strengthen concrete measures in the decisions we're going to take at this COP. So to recognize that we live in harmony with Mother Earth and find a new balance, but means recognizing the rights of Mother Earth as the only real transformative process to live in harmony with nature. Recognizing and implementing the actions centered in Mother Earth to avoid the commodification of nature and the impacts of the capitalist system on nature. To strengthen and apply integrally the rights of the indigenous nations and peoples and local communities, and recognize the actions of youth as stewards of Mother Earth and sustainable life, and to recognize that developed countries must carry through their commitments on financing and other measures for implementation to help developing countries. Nevertheless, the ambitions of the global framework we're negotiating do not correspond with the similar ambition that we have, that is for financing developing countries. The developed countries have to act with a spirit of commitment and solidarity that is in the convention. There needs to be a commitment about financing that cannot be transferred to an abstract concept of aligning with international financial flows or the flow of finances, because this is not committing. This is not a commitment, and it is not providing tangible, concrete funding. And it means that all the responsibilities for conservation of megadiversity will continue to be paid for by our developing countries, the most indebted countries, with the populations that most impoverished, and in a world with greater and greater gaps, inequality. We urge parties, because there's only one solution. It is a commitment to financing so that the GBF can be implemented. We need to protect Mother Earth with more equity, more solidarity, fewer speeches, and more concrete actions. Thank you very much.
好，下面请日本。
Now I would like to give the floor to Japan.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to express our sincere appreciation for the intense discussions that have been taken place and for the strong leadership of the Chair. I would also like to thank all the co-chairs and co-facilitators for their contributions in leading informal and other meetings at the ministerial and negotiators level. Japan recognized the importance of smooth button passing from the Aichi target to the new framework. In that regard, our highest priorities is the adoption of ambitious global biodiversity framework. We also recognize the importance of resource mobilization in order to implement the new global biodiversity framework, and the resource mobilization from all sources are key to the success. We also want to make sure that the effective and efficient use of resources under the framework of GEF. Regarding the DSI, we believe that stakeholder involvement and openness to innovations and new ideas is quite important for the successful establishment of mechanism. We look forward to constructively contribute to the remaining days' discussions towards the final adoption of the whole global biodiversity framework. Thank you very much, Chair.
好，感谢。
Thank you very much, Japan. Now I would like to give the floor to Nigeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies and distinguished delegates, Nigeria would like to align with the statement made on behalf of Africa. What is clear to Nigeria and our partners in West Africa is that we must use all the tools at our disposal to reduce the threats to biodiversity, and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework must guide our way. But it will never work if we don't take an honest and equitable approach. Nigeria and its sister ECOWAS member nations are leading the way. Our appeal to an ambitious global response to biodiversity crisis is urgent and focused. We have identified several measures as essential, including the global designation of 30% of land and oceans areas as protected by 2030, the establishment of highly and fully protected areas covering 30% of the global ocean, which prohibit environmentally damaging activities, and a global commitment towards immediate halting human-induced extinction of wild species, among others. But by this is only part of the solution, as we must also ensure that we are fully prepared to implement and the commitments we make for a better planet. In order to address biodiversity loss, we will need to increase our investment in nature protection by between USD 500 and 900 billion per year. Our ambition on addressing biodiversity loss must be matched with ambitious funding commitments. Investment in nature deliver the most positive results when priorities are defined from the ground up. We can no longer afford to lose our momentum in endless debate when the solutions are right in front of us. If we fail to act, the impact for people will be profound, and they will be felt no more than the way they are feeling in Africa right now. It must be for the developed countries to agree to meaningfully protect 30% of the planet and to do their part in funding the mitigation and adaptation effort essential for escaping the worst effect of the simultaneous catastrophic of climate change, biodiversity destruction, and species extinction. Focus on Africa and other low and middle income countries. And it is time for you to follow our lead for once, because we are already experiencing this catastrophic frustrated land. Firsthand, you may not see this effect as clearly in high-income countries as we do in Africa, but you soon see also. Today, we have an urgent plea. We ask that you listen to us. We ask that you trust us. We must act now, and we must be bold if we have any hope for preserving our planet, our people, and our future. Let us act now, together for future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Nigeria, for your intervention. I would like to thank all the representatives for your intervention. Now, I would like now to give an opportunity to any observer groups who would like to take the floor. Then you can raise your hand if you want to take the floor. I give the floor to IUCN.
Thank you, Chair. I make this intervention on behalf of IUCN. We welcome the progress made so far on various issues: the technical and scientific base for the GBF, marine and coastal biodiversity, invasive alien species, synthetic biology, Article 8J and related provisions, among others. However, we are concerned that our progress so far does not match the task in hand. We know that human societies and economies completely depend on nature, yet biodiversity is declining at the fastest rate in human history. It is urgent to do something about it, and to do it now. Similarly to what we observed in COP15 Part 1, there seems to be inconsistency between the content of the ministerial and high-level interventions that point at this urgency and the reality of the countless hours of negotiations. This is where the rubber hits the road. We respectfully recognize that there are divergent positions in many fronts, mainly in terms of means of implementation. Yet, it is obvious that an effective, fit-for-purpose global biodiversity framework will not be feasible unless its level of ambition matches the level of ambition of its resource mobilization strategy. IUCN stresses that we should mobilize all resources available to enable effective implementation of the GBF, including international, domestic, public, and private, and make the most out of the current mechanisms and funding flows to ensure quick deployment of resources. A lot can be gained that way. Nevertheless, we should also listen to calls for potentially significant reforms of existing mechanisms, tailored to provide longer-term and sustained financial resources for biodiversity. Chair, we cannot conclude COP15 with an impasse or a watered-down agreement. The world is watching and calls for success in Montreal by By 19 December, we should have secured a robust global plan to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and the means to implement it. The Montreal moment is within reach. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to give the floor to CBD Alliance. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm from the Third World Network and a member of the CBD Alliance. This is a turning point for the convention. there is no biodiversity without justice. There is no ambition without justice. Justice has to be operationalized in relation to protecting the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities who are our true stewards of biodiversity, and to right the wrongs inflicted on them over centuries. There's also a need to hold corporations to account. Too often, their extractivist activities have destroyed biodiversity and violated rights. Equity and the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities are at the heart of the Convention. The GBF is raising ambition, but with onerous obligations for developing countries to take actions to meet the goals and targets, as well as to monitor, review, and report on this. More than 70 developing countries have called for increased new and additional financial resources and the establishment of a new global biodiversity fund with easier access modalities. This is not about begging for money. There is an ecological debt owed to the developing world and to indigenous peoples and local communities. From 1990 to 2015, the cumulative net drain of resources flowing from developing to developed countries is estimated at $242 trillion US. We need to raise ambition, but it has to come with justice and equity. And this is seriously needed here in Montreal, right here, right now. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I noticed there's a new women's representative. You have the floor.
The women are thankful to the chair for giving us the floor. And here we represent various sectors of society. We note that we are waiting for adoption of the GBF. And as we wait for inclusion of Target 22, the gender responsive action plan, on the gender responsive action, we are praying that we take this opportunity to thank you all, first of all parties and all allies who have supported our relentless effort. And in doing so, we pray that you will integrate gender into the Convention's body of work, and in particular in the post-2020 GBF. This is a momentous moment in the years of advocacy, lobbying, and all the consultations that have taken place, and it is marking the inculcation of the rights of women and girls within the Convention. Organized by the Ministry of Environment of Finland in cooperation with the CBD Friends of Gender Equality Group, Women Caucus, co-chaired by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Climate Change of Malawi and Environment and Climate Change Canada, ministerial breakfast the day before yesterday, addressed accelerating the update of a gender-responsive post-2020 gender biodiversity framework. We are at a critical juncture of these negotiations to enable an agreement for a transformative, inclusive, and human rights-based framework that effectively and equitably addresses the drivers of biodiversity loss with rights-based actions and a whole-of-society approach. Women, for the first time, are being recognized in their rights and roles as key biodiversity custodians. Their knowledge and practices of conservation, sustainable use, and the fair and equitable benefit sharing are also recognized. If we fail to deliver and acknowledge the gender differences and exclude communities, specifically women in those communities, to engage in and benefit from sustained conservation efforts, then we will be key contributors to inequality, increased poverty, and biodiversity degradation at large. We must ensure inclusive and whole-of-society approach in the implementation of the post-2020 GBF. Our shared recommendations include make it happen. We need a fully gender-responsive GBF with a gender equality target. We need adoption of the post-2020 GBF and of action that will further help in guiding the monitoring and reporting of the GBF. We need adequate resources to fully operationalize the whole of the GBF. And we need full protection of women, environmental human rights defenders. We also need gender-responsive headline indicators in the monitoring framework. And pursuant to the Kunming Declaration, we need respect, protect, and promote human rights obligations to be key principles when taking actions to promote biodiversity. We therefore call for a human rights-based post-2020 GBF. And any decision made at this scope should not perpetuate inequalities, including gender-based violence linked to environment. So we count on you, all parties, to secure the way to this COP and ensure that gender equality is part of the solution to pursue a transformative vision for living in harmony with nature. Thank you, Chair.
We have the last two speakers due to the time limit. We will allow two more speakers. First, we'd like to give the floor to St. Lucia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. President. The small island developing states of the Eastern Caribbean and other countries in the wider Caribbean continue to experience the loss of their biological resources, which they depend on for economic stability, cultural heritage, and social well-being. I am speaking on behalf of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, which is headquartered in St. Lucia. In the Caribbean, 15% of the GDP is, for 50% is for employment, and 35% of GDP is for tourism, and for agriculture it is 16%. These are the two main economic sectors in the region. The U.S. General Assembly Resolution 75-214 recognizes that the Caribbean Sea is an area of unique biodiversity and that a highly fragile ecosystem that requires relevant regional and international development partners to work together to develop and implement a regional approach for the management of conservation, as well as coastal and marine resources, including the consideration of the concept of the Caribbean Sea as a special area in the context of sustainable development, including its designation as such without prejudice to international law. Caribbean seas have first-hand experience of the devastation caused by extreme weather events, the global pandemic, volcanic eruptions, and geopolitical volatility in the region. We may not be able to turn away our tropical cyclones, but we can reduce their impacts on our communities and our people and enhance the resilience if we promote ecosystem-based approaches and an all-of-society approach to biodiversity conservation. Living in harmony with nature is not just a fashionable slogan for our region. It is not a choice. It is mandatory to our survival. The OECS therefore embraces many of the recommendations made in the draft Global Biodiversity Framework, but we do hope to see more progress in the area of marine, coastal, and island biodiversity. The successful implementation of an ambitious GBF in the region recognizes and requires resources and capacity beyond which our governments and people can provide. We are also concerned that some of the targets and indicators which are configured globally may not be appropriate or easily applied to our national circumstances and priorities. The OECS therefore recommends that consideration be given to applying a regional lens for some of these targets, and that SIDS be allowed to select indicators that reflect their national priorities and which they can monitor. In line with this, the OECS supports the call by SIDS, as expressed in previous statements, to give more meaningful consideration to the vulnerabilities and special circumstances of SIDS. We thank aligned developed countries, and development partners for their support and assistance to SIDS thus far, as we seek to fulfill our obligations under the Biodiversity Convention. I would reiterate, however, that it is essential that SIDS receive the necessary financial, technical, and other resources required for effective implementation and monitoring. We are hopeful that the GBF will be finalized at this COP. The OECS Commission thanks China, Canada, and the CBD Secretariat for their warm hospitality and efficient organization and execution of CBD COP15 Part 2. And we look forward to a successful conclusion of this COP and acceptance of a robust global biodiversity framework that will contribute to the overall well-being of SIDS, humanity, and nature. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you for your statement. I would like to give the floor to South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. South Africa aligns with the statement by Senegal on behalf of the African Group. We believe the successful implementation of an ambitious GBF should equally be supported by the following. Firstly is the establishment of a dedicated global biodiversity fund to support the implementation of the global biodiversity framework as part of operationalization of Article 21 of the Convention. The contributions shall be as to take into account the need for predictability, adequacy, and timely flow of funds. Secondly, this COP must decide to explore the current finance landscape and develop a proposal for establishment of this dedicated global fund for biodiversity financing and present the instrument, terms of reference, and governance structures to be adopted in the 16th COPs for immediate operationalization to mobilize resources from all sources commensurate to the ambition of the GDF. South Africa, thirdly, therefore understands the proposed Global Biodiversity Framework Trust Fund, that it is an interim measure and should have its own governance structure to be dedicated exclusively for immediate implementation of the goals and targets of the GBF. In conclusion, South Africa calls on developed countries to provide certainty to close the financial gap of $100 billion 100 billion US dollars per annum. I thank you.
Thank you. Would like to give the floor to the last speaker, IPLC. You have the floor.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, I'm sitting here, but I'm not IPLC. I'm an academic and research member. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm a delegate of Imperial College London, and I speak on behalf of Target Malaria, a not-for-profit research consortium developing gene drive for malaria elimination in Africa. After years of online negotiation, we are finally here together, and this is thanks to research. Oh, sorry, did you mean to speak? Is there a confusion of mic?
Microphone to IPLCs.
Oh, hang on, I've got it. It's on here now. Here.
We thank the parties. I am speaking on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. We thank the parties for taking the time to listen to us and consider our text proposals, especially in this stage as we move to informal ministerial consultations on sticking points in the negotiations. We are hopeful that the COP will conclude a strong post-2020 global biodiversity framework that centers the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. We note and appreciate that our rights are reflected throughout. However, we would like to draw attention to Target 3. Indigenous and traditional territories are the longest-standing, proven pathway for living in balance with Mother Earth, surpassing conservation outcomes of modern protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. Recognizing their integrity and distinct nature is critical for the achievement of Target 3. The non-paper on item 9A, version 3, contains the text which may include and including as options preceding indigenous and traditional territories, effectively incorporating our territories under state regulation and conservation controls, contrary to self-determination and the human rights-based approach. IIFB considers these options as red lines, which should be deleted. Using which may include or including will further subsume indigenous and traditional territories within state-centric systems of protected areas and OECMs, and runs counter to the spirit and intention of this third pathway. We call on parties to support the text and indigenous or traditional territories by lifting the brackets and by deleting which may include or including in any form. We will submit the text proposal. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I'm very, very sorry. Due to the time limit, we will have no time for the rest of the speakers to speak. Before the end of the plenary session, I would like to provide my proposed plan for how I intend to proceed from this point forward in order to ensure the successful completion of all agenda items, in particular those issues, key issues that are closely related to GBF. This includes GBF itself, resource mobilization, digital sequence information on genetic resources, planning, monitoring, reporting, and review, with an associated monitoring framework, capacity building and development, and technical and scientific cooperation. Having heard the reports from the chairs of the two working groups, outcome of the consultations conducted by the ministerial co-facilitators as well as some constructive comments. I'd like to request Working Group 1, Rosemary, to continue their work to complete the CRPs. I would like to thank you in advance. We have the following items.
Item 9C and 13C on communications. Item 9D, gender plan of action. Item 12B, financial mechanism. Item 13A, capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation. Item 13B, knowledge management, and item 15A, cooperation. Item 16A, mainstreaming of biodiversity within and across sectors. Long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity. Item 16B, engagement with subnational governments, cities, and other local authorities to enhance the implementation of post-2020 global biodiversity framework. As we've heard from the Working Group 1 chair and from the ministerial co-facilitators, we've also made lots of progress on other priority elements of the COP. And I noted just now that all the party members expressed their hope that the outcome of this conference can be ambitious, balanced, actionable, and acknowledges the linkages among the issues. I will now use the outcomes of the work of the working groups and ministerial consultations and consult further in order to prepare a presence text. I will issue a set of texts that will cover a package covering the elements of the global biodiversity framework, capacity building, planning, monitoring, reporting, and review the monitoring framework for the global biodiversity framework, resource mobilization, and digital sequencing information. And tomorrow at 8 a.m., the text will be available as a non-paper tomorrow. Regarding the presence text, I don't have more information to share with you at this stage because my team is preparing for this. All in all, I would like to say that it is not a perfect document, not a document that will make everyone happy. However, it is a document that is based on the efforts of all of us over the last 4 years. It is a document that must be adopted at this meeting that is highly expected by the international community. And tomorrow morning, later tomorrow morning, probably about 12 tomorrow, I will convene a meeting of the heads of delegations to hear the feedback on the presence text. In the past 10 years, we've all worked hard around the clock. And we are even closer to the success of the completion of the COP conference. I ask for your trust and support in completing this task so that finally, next Monday, that is the 19th of December, the day after tomorrow, we will be able to cross successfully the finish line. I'd like to urge those regions that have not done so yet to identify and submit their nominees for elections for different offices. As I've mentioned in the first session of our meeting, the plenary has to conduct at its closing session the election of new bureau members, the chairs of SAPSTA and SBI, as well as the members of the respective compliance committees under the Cartagena and Nagoya protocols to replace outgoing members, and time is running short. So I urge you to submit the nominations as soon as possible. And I wish to advise delegates that the first part of the final plenary will be convened in the morning of Monday, December 19th. In other words, the morning of the day after tomorrow. We are now at the end of this conference, this session. Before we leave, I'd like to give the floor to the Secretariat for any announcements or anything need to remind you. Secretariat, you have the floor.
The Secretariat wishes to remind delegates that they are invited to a reception hosted by the Republic of Turkey, the incoming COP president, on the occasion of the high-level segment, this evening at 7:30 p.m. in room 710. The Secretariat is also pleased to inform delegates that the Clearinghouse Mechanism Award ceremony will be held tomorrow, December the 18th, in room 220B at 2 p.m. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Secretariat, and thank you all for your full dedication commitment today to the meeting, and thank you for your hard work and dedication in this week's consultation. I also would like to remind you to go to the website of the convention for updated information regarding scheduled meetings. The joint meeting is adjourned now. Thank you all.